How's it going? Hi. Welcome to Cartoon Characters 101. How are you? It's really great to see you all. Please welcome all of our guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very excited to welcome. I'm going to open my PowerPoint. We got a microphone too.
I don't like empty spaces.
That's right. Yeah. You have it up? Just hold on a microphone. Let's slide it down. Perfect. Awesome. What's up? Welcome. Good morning. Hello. My PowerPoint will now benefit me. My name is Kiff VandenHeuvel. I am the host of this panel, and this is Cartoon Characters 101. And sorry, I'm just getting my notes. And I'm very excited to have all of you here. I've said that 3 times. All right. So
I'm also very excited to have all of them here.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Let me start by introducing everybody on our panel. At the far left, she is a writer-creator of Sasquatch Detective comic book for DC Comics. She's worked for Mad TV, The Family Guy, DC Comics. Please help me welcome Ms. Brandee Stilwell. Next to Brandee is a gentleman who is works for Disney Animation. He's a manager of current series at Disney Animation Television. Please welcome Doug Ben Simon. Next to Doug, he is an actor in many things, most notably, as of late, as Marco Diaz in Star vs. the Forces of Evil. He is also a part-time ninja. Please welcome Mr. Adam MacArthur. And finally, next to me, she is a writer known for many things, most notably, or lately, Star Wars Forces of Destiny, as well as Justice League Action and Spider-Man. Please welcome Ms. Jennifer Muro. And my name is Kiff VandenHeuvel. I'm an actor and director and all kinds of other madness. Anyway, and a dad, I'm a good dad. And I'm a pirate and Pirates of the Caribbean, by the way, which is kind of so the focus of this panel is exactly like we said. This is kind of how do I begin in the idea, and we have different disciplines as character creators. We all come at it from different places. So I'm curious to start things off. How did you begin? How did you get started in this field, in whatever field that you happen to be inhabiting? Brandee, can I start with you?
Well, I was looking up, I'm super old, and I got on Mad TV a lifetime ago, and one of the showrunners just kept saying, "You're hilarious, why aren't you writing? You need to be writing." And then of course every time I would come in and I would pitch something, Saturday Night Live would literally do that same thing the next day. So I'd have to start all over again. But I would say probably the most important thing was I had several people push me into improv. And I've since graduated from IO, Second City, UCB. And, but it really helps you become creative, and it helps you think on your feet, and it makes it's kind of like brainwashing, but it makes your mind be like, if this, then what? If this, then what? Oh, if this, then what? Kind of put your brain on speed a little bit, and it just helps the creative process do it so much faster, but without drugs.
That's right. Awesome. Awesome. Doug, how about you? How did you get started in this?
Yeah, I have a kind of untraditional path. I actually never really thought I would work in entertainment. I was always a huge fan, but I was always more of a science guy myself. But graduating from a small liberal arts school in Connecticut called Wesley, and I was kind of pushed to come out to LA and give it a shot. I was a biofilm double major, actually.
Really?
Yeah. My brain is totally biocentric.
When you say you were pushed, were you pushing? Were people in your department pushing you? Or I
was a little bit of a blank slate there. Most of the people who did the film program there knew they wanted to do it since they were 3 years old. I was kind of a blank slate. They kind of molded along their way there. So they pushed me to come out to LA and give me a list of people to meet with, and just one meeting after another, I got a little window into animation, which I've always been a huge fan of myself, but never could draw, so I thought there's no path for me in animation whatsoever. But one thing led to another, and I ended up getting a job at Disney working in the creative executive ranks. And and I've never looked back. I like to say I'm fan-employed.
What does that mean for you in terms of what your job entails? In terms of, what does that mean?
Yeah, so being in the current series group, it's essentially, so when you develop a show, that goes through the development process, and that's, I like to equate to when you get pregnant with a child, and you have that child, and when you birth that child. Not just yet. But when that baby is born, it then goes into the current series group, and we raise it through all phases of its life, through its troubled adolescence, through its successful college years, all the way into adulthood. And so that's what we got. We guide and parent that baby all the way through adulthood.
Awesome.
For example, Star versus the Forces of Evil.
Which I work with on Adam.
Is that where you guys met? Did you work on
Yeah,
that?
we did. We met through working on Star. Adam's so great in promoting the show and working towards the show that he just adds a really collaborative element to all of that. So we got to do a lot of sort of extracurricular work on Star in that regard.
Awesome, awesome, great. Adam, how did you find yourself doing this work?
Okay, there's two things that I've always known since I was like, my first memories. One is that I wanted to do Kung Fu, and the other was that I wanted an agent. I have no idea where these ideas came from. My parents said that I've literally always asked, can I do Kung Fu? Can I get an agent? So I've always wanted to be an actor. They didn't listen to me. They were like, yeah, just be quiet. Until I was 11, they put me in Kung Fu. And then I was like, sick, I'm breaking them. And then, like 5 years after that, when I was 16, I finally got put in my first acting class. And I did improv and stuff like that in high school, but specifically like film and voiceover and all that stuff, acting class outside of my schooling when I was 16. So I grew up in Northern California. Took classes in San Francisco, got an agent up there, and sort of started working before I moved to LA 15 years ago this month.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
So.
Yay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, awesome.
And something to echo here, because you notice Adam did improv, we have improv over here. I actually did a little bit of improv in high school as well. I want to reinforce that notion. Improv is an amazing way to get into the mind of a character, and it's so visceral and tangible and sparky. It forces you to come up with something, even if it's terrible, it forces you to come up with something, and I think that's something people get really paralyzed by, is with infinite opportunities, you just can spin, but when you're on that stage, having to make a decision, you're forced to just go and push and move, and you refine in that way.
Yeah, we're also selling an improv curriculum.
Jen, what's your story? How'd you get involved in this work?
Oh, well, I'm from New York. I guess kind of like you were saying, when I was 11, I knew I wanted to move to California. I had no idea why I wanted to move to California. I just knew I needed to be there. And I come from a small Italian family, and we just didn't do that. And the girls didn't do that. That's like asking to go to the moon, literally. And somehow I made it happen. And I originally wanted to go, I went to USC and was going to go for film scoring. Music.
Was that your sort of Trojan horse way of being able to get permission to go?
Yes, school was the way to do that. And I ended up going into the film production program and kind of fell into animation. I was on the Nick Cannon show. I lived on Sunset, right? And that was very short-lived, and it was canceled after, I think I was there a month. So.
What were you doing? Were you writing on the show?
I was like early on a brand new like PA, and then they needed development help in Nickelodeon at the Burbank office, and I kind of fell into development, and that's where I started, and I had every job there, and then started writing while I was there, and so I've been an editor, I've been an EMR editor, I've been an APR editor, I've been an animatic editor, I've been a script supervisor, I've done the whole gamut from beginning to end. And then I sold my first show in 2011, and then again in 15, and then I was like, I can't keep being at Nickelodeon and keep doing everything else because I'm going to die. So, yeah, and then I ended up doing all the stuff I'm doing now, and it is funny, the improv thing. My equivalent is playing D&D. Since I was 17, and that's kind of the version of improv.
Completely.
D&D is an elaborate improv game.
It is absolutely.
Can I play sometime?
Absolutely.
I've
Really?
never,
As long as you don't
I've
make
never
a
played
DM.
before.
Okay.
It's like the best improv, which is fantastic. And I'm not like particularly an actor, but you know, when you start that at 17, the chicken's back.
bookstore.
You know, back then it wasn't cool.
Right.
But now it is, so.
Now it's very.
Ha Mom.
Awesome. Awesome. Just real quick, improv was my way in too. I'm from Grand Rapids, Michigan originally, and started playing in college and wanted to do this work. And in a similar situation, like my family was like, "What? No, you're a young Christian grandchild of 2 ministers. You are a covenant youth. You have no business participating in the godless Babylon." I was like, "Yeah, but I like Eddie Murphy too much." So I made my break for it under the guise of being a teacher, and became a teacher, but to teach improv. And along the way also got representation, started working in movies, TV, and cartoons and stuff, so it's super fun. Awesome, well, just a quick question for the panel, before I move on to the next topic, were there anything that came out of that part of our discussion that sparked something that like Doug, you had just mentioned, like the impact of improvisation or Dungeons and Dragons on your experience. How does that, like it does, I 100% agree that it makes your mind feel like it's on speed and you're creating things, but like, what is it about that aspect of storytelling that is beneficial for what you're doing now? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think just in terms of, the panel's about character creation, what is that, how do we go with that? I think something to think about is when you are looking to do these things, the biggest issue everyone runs into is the standard writer's block, or that sort of paralysis by options. And I think something that improv and D&D do is they provide some parameters and reins that force you to make decisions within a thing. I think a lot of people view, and maybe I'm self-promoting a little bit of the executive points, but that notes and things like that are like horrible things that ruin all projects and suck the creative out of everything. But really the most successful creators are those that can take those and look at them as hurdles to jump over and as creative elements. The same way there's a rock in the middle of a river doesn't throw the rock out, it moves around it. And I think it uses it to make a better thing. And then you get a dam is a way that you can do that. You build a dam, and a dam system is an ecosystem in life. And that becomes an environment. Like that's the bio side of me coming out. But when you can take a roadblock, a bump, something like that, and incorporate it into something and use it the same way in life. You never just sail through with life getting everything you want. There are always roadblocks, there are always challenges in the way, and you utilize those and you build those into your character, and that's how you make a compelling character, because everyone deals with those things and sees those things. So even in the meta internal process of getting a script or making a character, making a show, you take those things and you use them. If you can incorporate them into what you're doing, it's going to be twice as strong as if you get a smooth, easy path with no bumps whatsoever.
Awesome.
Well, it's kind of like what you were saying, it's like this and that, so it proposes some of those like, well, I had this, but now if this is happening, then what, and so it's sort of just, yeah, it's, especially for animation, like from the voice actor standpoint, every time I'm in a session, I have my voice director and I have usually a director of the specific episode, so as I'm delivering lines, I'm getting feedback from both the director, my voice director, and the director, or the director through the voice director to me. So that it's all these things that's like, oh, it helps me get to a read that maybe I never thought about, instinctually or whatever. So I think all of that stuff. The cool thing I think about animation specifically is it's so collaborative. Like there's so many like pieces, moving pieces that create this amazing thing that. It all, you're all working together to sort of create this character. So like, for example, like Marco Diaz, where he sort of started in the pilot to where now we just ended season 3 of Star vs. the Forces of Evil, like where he's kind of gone and things like that. It's really, it's... Just kidding. I'm totally kidding.
Start over.
Yeah. So what I was gonna know. But yeah, anyway, it's cool. That's a cool thing about animation is it is so collaborative, and that, those little hurdles or those little voice directions and all that stuff kind of help you get to this like next level and really make a project pretty awesome.
Fantastic. Well, let me ask this question. Speaking of parameters and guidelines, when you're creating an original character versus working with a character that's already been established, what are the unique challenges with, for each of you as you've gone through that process, as you come to something that has not been established? It's completely on you to to find his life. You know, like, one of the things that jumps out for me, like, starting at the end of the table, Brandee, for example, with Sasquatch Detective, brand new IP, like, what was the process of creating her and your process and character creation from that standpoint?
I was doing a show at I.O., I was on the main stage, and somebody established that they were in the woods. And so I just came out as a Sasquatch, and I named her Tanya, and it killed in the audience, and so it became one of those things where you have, like, as an improviser, yes, it's all fresh and new, but sometimes you have a character in your back pocket that you have to go to. And mine were always like creepy small children, that bad things would happen if I came out on stage. And then, so Tanya became one of those characters as well. And so then I knew that anytime I used her, she always killed. If a show wasn't going well, I could pull her out. It would save things. So then a couple years ago, I got asked to audition for Saturday Night Live, and I pulled her out, and she killed, and I got brought back, but I didn't get it, obviously. And then I was doing the grad program at Second City, and Ron West gave everybody an assignment, and I was actually driving to WonderCon, and it was WonderCon when it was here at LA, it wasn't in Anaheim. And we had an assignment. There was 4 women on the team and 4 men, and you just had to write a sketch that had all 4 women in it. And as I was driving down the 110, there's the Police Academy, a road sign, and I'm like, Charlie's Angels, you guys. I don't know if you remember Charlie's Angels, but that's the Police Academy that they graduated from. So I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write Charlie's Angels plus a Sasquatch. And then that became the anchor of our show. And then I had editors from DC Comics that were there, and they were like, why we need to do something with this. And I was already going to flesh it out as an animated show. And then the next thing I knew, Dan Didio, who's head of publishing, came in and was like, we sold X amount of this, we sold X amount of this, go home, write me an outline. So things do come out of improv, guys. And that's, and then of course you take the notes, because originally she was called Yeti Cop, and Ron West was like, Sasquatch Detective's better, and I fought it. But then when you think about it, you're like, that is a good note, and I'm gonna take it, and I'm gonna run with it. So that's kind of how that came about, and then as I fleshed her out, and the great thing about having your own IP, you can create what her voice is, what her objective is, what she would do, what she wouldn't do. And now she's this tall, husky, hairy Audrey Hepburn that has like a Lucille Ball type character, but with MacGyver-like skills. And now she's succeeding in Los Angeles and in my head.
It's great.
When does it come out?
The graphic novel comes out December 12th. And
Pre-orders right now? Amazon?
yeah, I believe so.
Cool.
And then the backstories came out behind Mark Russell's Exit Stage Left, the Snagglepuss Chronicles, which was very successful. And so it started as a backstory on that. But then the collected edition and then the new origin story will come out in December.
Awesome. Awesome. And just for IP stands for intellectual property. I just looked that up.
Not improv.
Not improv. Contrary to everything I've been saying here. Awesome. Jen, what's your process like for creating original characters when you're generating ideas?
Yeah, compared to like Star Wars, it's kind of
Right.
yeah, because that's such a precious thing, I think, and there's more of a committee situation going on in that case. It's nice to have that freedom. I mean, my process is just emulating characters or personality traits that I like or admire or can either see in myself or relate to. I think that really helps. But that also helps with the IPs out there that are huge, but you can kind of relate to those characters and what you have similar and kind of draw from that without wrecking what they are, but they wouldn't let you anyway. I mean, that's not going to happen. But it's interesting. I mean, it's you kind of grab from where you can. I mean, I do anyway. So.
What, like from life, or just
Correct.
ideas and
Exactly.
things that just crack you up? Or?
Correct. Yes. And it really is for me. I mean, it's kind of random. It's all over the place. But that's how my messy brain works. And actually, I mean, doing IPs, I mean, it does help you it gives you the structure, and you're gonna get notes, that's the heck for sure. And it's not taking that personally in terms of that. And there's also not taking it personally for your own IP when you get feedback on that. And yeah, and it's trying to step out from yourself and going, is this really good, or am I just holding on to something too tight?
That's an interesting idea of like, especially when it's something that you create, how hard do you defend that line as part of the process? We've certainly discovered in doing improv, but like for you guys, well, Doug, for example, like when you're working with someone to develop an IP or an original character idea, how do you tread when you create this as you're giving notes and things?
This is actually a bit of mantra I live my entire life by, and I think it's unbelievably important. Outside of studying science, which is unbelievably important. I think it's taking this core notion of listen like you're right or fight like you're right, speak and fight like you're right, but listen like you're wrong. And I think if you hold that true in your heart throughout any kind of notion, anything in your life, but especially with character development, I think it's one of these things where you only invite creative spark, and again, not to get back into the bio, but like, that's why we have such amazing variation in species, is everyone who was in the environment and grabbed onto different things and did that to survive. And I kind of equate the notes process to natural selection and those kind of things where the best things make their way through that process and survive and are sharpened and hardened by that. It's a little more real time, obviously. But I think if both sides keep that notion in mind, I am a big proponent, though I am a creative executive, that my job doesn't exist without someone who has a strong vision and a strong statement to say, a story to say, a character to put out there. So I think it does really have to start from that point, but if you keep something like that too precious and to yourself alone, it only really ever exists in your mind, and you need that first step out into the world to see, how do other people see this? I know how I see it, but how does it get perceived by anyone else? And if you don't have that back and forth, it can be challenging, and you can create a character that's harder to connect to because you have 6 layers in your head of why they would do something, but the audience has no idea why that would ever come about. They don't have that same perspective that you have. So I think that's a really important element of it. Similar to Sasquatch Detective was, it went out there, it killed, and that's how you know. It survived that first horrible, terrifying step of being put in front of an audience.
Right.
And they responded, and you knew what they responded, I would imagine, and you get to finesse from that point.
Right.
But it needs to start with that vision, and then get exposed to the world and survive the push.
Awesome. Oh, that's great. That's great. I really, like, there's laughter of recognition every time you bring up your bio background, but the way you're connecting it to the artistic process is really fascinating. Those metaphors are really resonating.
Yeah, I'm an odd duck.
You're a huge nerd on so many levels.
Yes. Proudly so.
Adam, what's your process when you get, I mean, coming at it from a voice actor standpoint, and you get a new character that isn't established, how do you approach your character creation process for the audition? I mean, everything's on the line you're going up against. I walk that same tightrope. So what's your process like?
Yeah, well, first of all, I never think about the stakes. Like, oh man, I could be on a new show, or like whatever. You never think about that kind of stuff. You really just try and be true to whatever information you're presented with. So sometimes for auditions, I'll get a description that's like excitable, and that's it. I don't see a picture of the person. I have just lines. I don't see a script, and it's like, okay. And I just, based on the information that's in the lines, you try and formulate, something. I really like to to create a voice for a character when I have a visual. The visuals can be immensely helpful because an animation style can dictate tone of the show. One of the questions I'll ask like the assistants at my agency when I go in for auditions, or the agents, is like, well, is this actually Sam right there is one of the assistants at CESD, and Kathy over here is one of the agents at my voiceover agency. But I just asked Sam the other day. I had an audition, and I was like, it was a last-minute audition. I got in. I had visuals, so I got to see what the characters looked like. But I was like, what channel is this for? And he was like, Cartoon Network. And I'm like, oh, okay. I have an idea of what this show is supposed to tonally kind of sound like. But a visual is always really nice. That's like bonus because you don't get it with every audition. But yeah, it all comes down. I just, sounds lame. I guess I just do my best.
I think that is, well, that's a great take home, is do your best. But it's, but what I appreciate about that now, like I just took a character animation workshop with Charlie Adler. And if you're interested in doing this work, take a class with Charlie Adler. Just as if you're a stage actor. Oh, my goodness. If you're a stage actor, take a class with Charlie Adler.
Agreed, he's one of my best friends.
Is he really?
Absolutely, and I've learned so much from him. We actually met on Stripperella.
Oh, really?
I think I
No
was coordinating something at the time, and because he's an actor and he comes from the stage, he speaks to voice actors like I've never seen before, and it really helps them a lot for them. They relate so well, yes, I highly recommend that. And he comes from it's acting, it does not mean voice acting at all.
Yeah.
It's, you know, I mean, well, you took it, so.
I mean, it's his love of the craft and the work. He was Brandee Smurf for Gen Xers. Like he's been around for forever, and it was a real gift to both my wife and I in our careers in life. And but it's one of the biggest things about it was confidence. It was really the thing that I took from that was trust your instincts, and what you had just said, Adam, of like I'm trying to do a good job versus I'm trying to get it right. And if you try to get it right, chances are you're going to strike out.
Yeah.
If you do your best and tell the story, claim victory and depart the field.
Yeah, I mean, there really is no right. And it's kind of goes back to it's so collaborative that everyone has input. So really trying to do it right doesn't really matter. Especially for a voice actor, for an audition point of view, it's like
Yeah.
there really is no right. And at some point, I mean, I've had callbacks where I go into the callback and they'll be like, "Oh, we loved your audition, but can you do it with the voice that you slated with?" And the slate is it's literally me before my audition going, "My name's Adam MacArthur, reading for the role of Cup." And then my voice is like, whatever. And then I'll get in and they'll be like, "Can you do it in the voice that you just said your name in?" I'm like, "Oh, okay." You know, like,
Right.
yeah, it's fun. It's you can find your way, collaboratively.
Well, I think a big part of that also is finding out what isn't working is just as important as what is working, because things are only good relative to what's bad, and things are only bad relative to what's good. And I think from our side, when we're not the ones auditioning, but hearing tons of different audition takes, it's just as important to know whether or not a take is right, wrong. I think that's totally subjective and not really the right way to think about it. When you hear something that is a clear take that could be it but isn't right, you only hear it against something that does feel authentic and true. And so it's always comparative in that way, and I think that's really important.
Let me transition into talking briefly about working with established characters. We've all in one way or another have worked with a character that's been established that you're stepping up to the plate and go, oh my gosh, I'm going to, like I just played Han Solo for a show that Jen wrote. And you gotta get over, Han Solo doesn't know he's Han Solo. He just knows he's gotta fly the Millennium Falcon and not blow up. So but I, the fan, know what I've gotta work through. What's that experience like for you guys as you face those specific challenges, jobs, or the other question I had too on the heels of that is, if you have an idea for that thing, what do you do with that idea? May you write it? Like, I remember William Hanna, Joseph Barbera, right? One of them was on Larry King. And when I was in college, I wrote a screenplay for Dynamite, Dog Wonder. And I didn't know if I had the rights to it. The rights were the thing that stopped me from moving forward in my creative. Is that something that we should stop? You don't necessarily have to share it, but like, I'm asking all these questions because I want to know the answers.
No, that's actually a really good point. I mean, I was a 20-year-old idiot who wrote an entire Dragons of Autumn Twilight screenplay, and it's still sitting there. I had no business doing that. I spent a lot of time on that. I also learned a lot, but I did it anyway. I don't recommend necessarily doing that these days. But no, I absolutely understand. And I think I think it's sometimes it feels like a safe way to begin a creative process a little bit. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
Before you even delve into something that's your own, it kind of gets your feet wet and loosens things up a little bit. Not a 120, 140 page screenplay, but maybe something a little smaller would be okay.
Yeah. Well, that's great.
you know,
Well, and put through another lens, isn't that fan fiction today?
that is,
It's
Yeah.
working with established characters, designing your own stories, minimally, whether or not it's a project you will sell and make money off of or any of those things, it's a great creative exercise in navigating a character. You don't have your own character, play with a character you love. And that is a way to flush out these things and figure out how do you play in different spaces, how do you play with different archetypes, especially for characters that you might not personally relate to on like the face of it, digging in deep and figuring out how can I make my character like this. And so I think that's a great place to start experimenting. I think it's also really important to remember all established characters were originally original characters. So the only difference is someone else did a little bit with it first. So whether or not you are taking that character and trying to put them in their voice in a different setting, or really playing with something and trying it in a totally different way. I think that's something interesting that Disney did with the new Mickey Mouse shorts that are out there now. Is Mickey's the most iconic character in the world in those perspectives. And the Mickey Mouse shorts we put out now are, you know, it's the same, you feel the same Mickey, but there are other elements that give him different life and different feel.
Yeah.
Those are actually a really great example, because they're really, really good, and it does feel like you feel nostalgia when you're looking at this newly created thing, but you're getting
It's a
the same-
contemporary sense
Yeah.
of humor, but with
Yeah.
that core
Really awesome.
appeal and love.
It's like there's mischief in Mickey that because of what he is in culture prohibits us from being able to see the mischievousness that was there in the beginning, or the trouble he gets into in the 40s, or, you know.
Well, it's all part of the history of the character.
Yeah.
So you get to put it out there and play with it. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic of how you can work with an established character. But you know, again, it's all about just creative parameters and constraints. The same way you have to put them on yourself when you're doing an original character. Those are kind of there for you, and I think it's about your willingness to work within and with them is really the challenge of it.
And then, like, this past year, I've been freelance writing for Disney, and it's for a program that hasn't come out yet, and it's gonna be for Amazon Echo. So, like, your kids can be like, Alexa, what happened in Zootopia today? So I wrote 30 scripts for Zootopia, and knowing what my perimeters were of like doing my research, and you always want to do your research and you want to know the world, and then once you start writing that character, you need to be like, what would they do this? But maybe they wouldn't do that. And then I think you can start exploring once you start doing that, and then kind of take your own, you can create a little bit like freedom, because Disney's so good to like clamp back down. And then the next one that I did was The Incredibles and Brad Bird's. Like, no, there's a hard clamp on that one. But just to stay in that perimeter, but yet take it and be creative and take it wherever you want. And now my current project, which is when I leave here, I get to spend a weekend doing low end, but it's still I have Star Wars on my resume now too. It's again for Amazon Echo, and it's going to be Choose Your Destiny, and it's Han and Chewie. So I just spent the last couple weeks taking that book, editing it, rewriting it, and then creating passages. And so then we just got Lucas Notes, and it's like, we want this voice back in here, but I'm like, there's a timing element. That's the reason why I edited it down. But the cool thing is to be able to take that character and you know it, but then you can explore a little bit, but you do kind of have to stay in that world, and then hope for the best, and so far we're good. But I think that also helps you when you get to write your own product, then you kind of know your perimeters and what you set up and who your character is, and you kind of, again, it goes back to improv, then you can kind of like know what this person would do, what this character would do, what they wouldn't do, and what like maybe even, you know, what their own badge of honor is, because you're creating it.
Awesome, awesome.
I'm on pain meds, so I'm crazy. So if I ramble, I'm sorry.
Well, spec scripts, I mean, that's coming back these days, and, I mean, I guess there's a fine line between fan fiction and spec scripts, it depends on what you want to do.
An agent.
That's true,
Yeah.
or what you want to do in life. But yes, so it's helpful, I mean, that's a great exercise as well, but not being like, okay, I'm just gonna put it in a drawer, it actually can be useful at some point to use. And, yeah, so that's another way to exercise.
Because even a couple of years ago, like people were writing MASH. They were
Yeah.
turning in spec scripts
Yeah.
for MASH, but and you're like, wow, that's really dated, but no, they could still capture the voice of Hawkeye, and if you can like capture it, then you're like, well, if they can write for this, they can write for something, for anything.
Yeah, I mean, that's what specs are for.
Yeah.
To just, for executives to,
Get a sense of
yeah, and
you.
decide that.
Awesome. I do want to open up the room for questions from the audience. If you have a question or something that you want to ask, please throw your hand up, and any of our panelists would be happy to answer said question. So that's going on. But that's like a standing thing. So if you got one, feel free to ask it. Yes, right over here.
When you're in the middle of the creative process and you're working on an idea and you're finding that it's just not working, do you usually find yourself abandoning it entirely and throwing it away, or do you usually like put it aside and then maybe come back to it later when you've had time to refresh your mind and think about it a bit more?
Can I ask you a question before that?
Yeah.
What made you know it wasn't working?
I don't know, just like any reason, like maybe you're just not feeling it anymore, maybe like you had an idea that you thought was great and then you start working on it and then, it just isn't coming together the way you thought it would, or, any number of reasons.
So I would say, personally, not in my work setting, but I would say, show it to someone. See what they're thinking. Get an audience point of view. I think that is something where a lot of people get nervous and because they don't want someone to steal their idea or something. I think that's important to be mindful of and to be careful of. But find someone you trust and someone that you can essentially have an audience see the work in progress element. And that automatically will tell you something you might not have noticed. Like, you realize your character has no face. It might be hard to connect with a character with no face in a story about whatever it might be. A face story. And it might be little things like that, like you just were so in your head about where you wanted it to go, you didn't realize on the face you never invited anyone else into the party.
That's great. I mean, personally, since doing, for the longest time, I just have a level of confidence with certain auditions where I'm like, that's fine, I'm gonna send it, it's all good. But after going through the process of working with Charlie in particular, and living with someone who I trust, who can listen to it and go and give me that audience element of feedback to be like, I got a feeling about this, but I don't know if it's 100%. She'll be like, well, you're crazy. Let me get back to cleaning the dishes. And I'll be like, all right. Or I will redo it. Like there's, I think that feedback loop keeps you from filling your pocket full of rocks and eating worms and creating a new document and forgetting about what you started writing. You know what I mean? Like, maybe your idea is sound. It's just, that one road might be gravelly. So keep looking for, I think I mixed 7 metaphors. Very, very proud.
I understand.
But you feel me?
Yeah, I got it.
All right, good.
I think it's also important to remember that failure is a whetstone for good creative work, and you're never going to get sharper unless you fail at something, because no one's ever made the thing it was great the first time.
Right.
They're done. Even if it is their first show, they have done plenty of other things in their life that haven't worked or have failed. And if you're too worried to fail, you're never going to get anywhere. And you should invite failure almost like a rep, like curling weights or whatever, something like that. Anytime you fail, you're just getting a little bit better at something you're doing. You learned a little bit, you take that forward. So as long as you embrace that, you'll always have forward momentum.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like not thinking about mistakes. Like I said earlier, you just can't think about, oh, this could be this or whatever. Just do it because you want to do it.
I mean, sometimes things are not working, but it also just might not be working. If you were trying to sell something, maybe just something's not working in the industry at that time. I mean, I've had projects that I've done with a box, and years later, I'm like, well, I happen to have that. Let me pull that out and look at it again, and then you're like, oh God, did I write that? And then maybe you just have to rework that again. I mean, I always think it's worth keeping, and then putting it in a box, bringing it back out, whether it's 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years.
It's also okay if you're just like really bad at that thing.
Yeah.
And you should go do something else.
Or
That's also a possibility.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that's how you get into something else, It's like, oh, I was going to be a writer, but I was really awful, so now I'm a voice actor. Who knows?
That's my bad. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Yes, sure.
What is your perfect fantasy character? What, if you see a script or you're writing something, you go, oh, this is the character that I really want to play or write or see?
Each of us personally?
Yes.
Boy, that's, I mean, I can sort of speak to, like, so, Marco Diaz on Star vs. the Forces of Evil, when I first met this guy in my audition, I was like, oh man, this guy is so incredibly relatable. And why I would say he's sort of been like the dream character to play is because there's so many different layers to him. He is excitable, he's loyal, but there's just, I don't know, he's very real. There's a lot of dimensions to the character, and I think anytime I'm auditioning for something and there's, you know, layers to the character, that's for me a dream character. Anytime there's something I can really like dig into and show different sides. I mean, sometimes, you know, I'll audition for video games and it's like every direction is like yelling at an enemy, yelling at an enemy, yelling at an enemy, yelling at an enemy. It's like there's only so many ways you can yell at an enemy. You can yell at him if he's across the room, you can yell at him if he's right here, you can yell at him if you're like punching him in the stomach, and you can yell at him if you're getting hit. That's about it.
Unless he stole your car, that could be anger.
You're right, you're right. No, there's actually a lot of different ways.
Justifying layers.
Yell at an enemy, yeah, justify layers. And that's actually,
That's what you do.
that would be an example of doing my best. Would be like making the best out of like, you know, bad direction. But for me, the characters that are the most like relatable and sort of like the dream characters are the ones that have a lot of different dimensions that I can see.
For me, it's always, it's a hard question to answer in a vacuum, so I choose not to answer it in a vacuum. I always love seeing characters juxtaposed against the other characters around them. This is totally just my personal, I see a couple of people on this, but I'm a huge fan of My Hero Academia. I think it's a brilliant show, and it took me until the most recent season to fall in love with the character I love now, who's Bakugo. And he is a viscerally angry character at every single step, completely opposite to my personality. And in one episode where he gets in a confrontation with the main character, you just reveal this entire other side of him that you never thought would be there. He seemed like such a one-note, single-dimensional character with nothing to offer but anger and antagonism, and in this one episode, it just completely rewrote the character in my mind. So to me, it's characters that surprise you in ways you didn't expect. And that's not like a jump scare surprise, it's a deep emotional element that you never could have expected to come from that character. Not from like whiteboarding it out, but in relation to their dynamics and relationships to other characters.
I mean, it's kind of hard to find flawed, funny, action, female. That would be like a dream character, and that's fairly rare. And if that's the money melon right there. If that comes your way, that's, yeah, for me, that would be it.
That's our butterfly.
Yeah.
I spend my life toggling between Peter Venkman in Ghostbusters, Han Solo, and John McClane in Die Hard. And I think that combination of a character is my dream. And I don't know why that is. I'm none of those guys, and I'm all of those guys at the same time. I'm a matcher, I'm a voice matcher. So like, I always gravitate to established properties. And the thing that terrifies me, doesn't terrify me, I'm fine with creating original characters, but they all kind of sound like me. So I really like...
That's a good sound, man.
Oh, thanks, man. I need to fall in love with that sound.
Audience feedback.
That's right. That's a new thing. Thank you. I'm going to use it. But I think it's just because those are the characters that I related to the most in the 80s, and they were the guys who escaped Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I want to escape with them. And I realize I've already escaped, but it's still, I think it'd be really fun to put on a Ghostbusters suit. And see people cosplay to me, you know? But to play Han Solo for real was a big deal. That was fun.
That was great. You did a great job.
Thank you.
For me, it was, I'm sorry to be simplistic, but it's Wonder Woman. And, you know, when the film came out last year, it was, you know, it's flawed, it's not perfect, but for me, it was the first time I'd ever seen a female character be so powerful and even to have the scene where she's like, oh, I'm gonna go take care of this because this needs to be done. And they're all like, yeah, sure, okay, you go do that. I've never seen that before. And I remember when I walked out of our screening, I was like, every woman in there was bawling because we had never seen that before. And I wanna say issue 3 of Sasquatch Detective, she might have an invisible jet fly over her because Wonder Woman happened to be in the neighborhood. Because it's DC, I could do it. And to have Wonder Woman show up at the very end, and you know, Tanya has been tasered by an ex who works, Gary, who works Fish and Wildlife and Game, and someone had called because they thought there was a bear on the front yard. It's Tanya's just doing detective work. There's recent break-ins. But to have Wonder Woman show up at the very end and Tanya just being like, can I play with your lasso? And Wonder Woman being like, no. But to me, like, that, I'm like, I was crying. I'm like, I wrote Wonder Woman lines. So that would always be.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Because that, like, Linda Carter was like my life. And in the 70s, it was like Bionic Woman, Wonder Woman, Charlie's Angels, and there was this whole thing that happened. And then it kind of disappeared for a long
Yes,
time, for like the
absolutely.
entire 80s. And then Xena and Buffy sort of happened in the 90s. And it has come and gone. But yeah, now that that's happening, it's pretty, and then to write the Wonder Woman is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also great that, I think what was so great about that Wonder Woman movie versus just the pantheon of Wonder Woman is she also had flaws, and I think it's great that we can now start, that society is getting better and better every day, that female protagonists don't just have to be the beacon of strength 100% of the time, they can also be flawed, dimensionalized characters, and I think it's important that we have strong female protagonists who are real and have those flaws and how you overcome your flaws and overcome your challenges. I think it's fantastic that there's so many great shows like that.
That's why I like female Indiana Jones or female, Jack Sparrow, who are ridiculous action. Like that's, like we don't see that too often. Melissa McCarthy has done it a little bit, and that's probably one of the few. And more of that would be great.
Yeah.
That's the dream.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's interesting, I took this workshop with Dave Walsh, and Mary Jo Smith, who runs the ABC promo department, said to us in the class, she's like, you guys need to know, there is no guy in a room smoking a cigar watching over the IP of what Disney is. She's like, it's me. And this kind of chill washed over the room of everybody kind of going like, we are the defenders of the flame. We are the ones who it's incumbent upon to tell these stories. No one else is going to tell it for us. And it's all of our jobs to tell the stories that speak to us in different ways, whether it's regardless of what your media is or how you function through it. I guess my final question for everybody on the panel, that was a comment. My final question is, what advice do you have to anybody who's interested in the process of creation of character? Brandee, we'll start with you.
I would say I learned this at Family Guy, and this kind of even speaks to you a little bit. I would write something and I wouldn't finish it, and then I called it my lazy Susan, and I would start something else and I would write it and I'd turn it and I would write something else and I would turn it, because you never know who's going to be standing in front of you at Starbucks. And finish your script, even if you have to walk away from it for a while. Finish it, and if you have like 6 projects, finish one of them, because you have no idea who might be like, hey, well, what do you have? Let me see what you have. And I don't know how many times I had agents and managers when I was at Family Guy that were like, well, what do you have? And I'm like, but I don't have anything finished. Finish it. Do whatever you can to finish it. We all have smartphones. Put them in files. And so if you're standing in line with somebody, you're like, what do you want? Do you want a Bible? Do you want a spec? Do you want original IP? What do you want? Here you go. And always be prepared.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, mine's a little just sort of like ABCD kind of advice things. It's what I said before, fight like you're right, listen like you're wrong. My boss tells me that all the time. My grandma told me that all the time, and I live by it all the time. Grab onto any yes you get, but don't let no's deter you. I think is a really important one. and study science.
Yeah.
Biology is the study of how we exist in be and are, and it's important to understand why we are all self-aware matter.
Yes, it is. That's great. Anna.
Something that I have found immensely important for my own creativity is doing things that make me feel like me. So martial arts, for example, is not acting related per se. I mean, it is, because I can do what you're doing in science and literally relate everything back to like old school kung fu movies. But doing things outside that I've always done that I love. So, you know, whether it's video games or martial arts, like working out, like stuff like that, allows me to feel like myself. And when I feel like myself, that's when I'm bringing what I bring to the table, which is me, the most effectively. So I would say do the things you love. Travel, like meet people, talk to people, like you said. You'll never know who you'll meet. And that doesn't necessarily just mean someone that will ask you for your script or whatever. It also means like an amazing encounter that changes who you are as a person, which is very valuable. And it's something you can bring when you're creating a character or whatever. So do the things that you love.
Jumping out of that, what I forgot is luck is just opportunity meeting preparation. And speaking of what Adam's talking about.
I mean, writing a Bible and developing characters is sometimes a good way to not worry about what's on a script or what an individual story. I I get paid to write Bibles and develop characters for people, and that is something that you don't have to. It just gives you a wide, it's like you're thinking about the world, and you're thinking about the overview and the individual thing. You don't have to get bogged down in story necessarily. And it just breaks down, it just makes you think about it in a different way. And not everyone does that for their characters. They're just like, here's their 5 personalities and here's the story. It's like, we'll break that down, who's around them. It's a great way to put them in a world and have, kind of like you were saying, the people around them to, yeah, it just makes a big difference. Just know, it'll help you know your character, and it'll make you create something so much richer than just thinking of personality and story and that's it. So that's very specific, but there you go.
That's great.
Yeah.
All these things, and the best advice that I would share is stay curious. Stay curious, diversify your interests, explore. If you have a creative spark, you don't know where it manifests. It might be in carpentry, it might be in voice, it might be in cooking. But explore and express.
Can I add one more thing?
Please.
I'm gonna beat this over the head, improv. Because the thing is, I was that person that was behind the camera. I was, I did sports and stuff, but I couldn't go to a party. I couldn't talk to people. And now that I've done, I have all this improv under my belt. If you're in front of me at Target, I will talk your ear off, and I become obnoxious to like my exes would be like, please shut up. And but I have confidence now. I couldn't be sitting up here had I not taken improv. So it builds confidence, and confidence in yourself is so much, especially the younger you are, the earlier you get the confidence, I think just the better you'll be.
Most of what we're talking about is like studying for a test. Improv is that test.
And it doesn't, if comedy's not your thing, that's why D&D is great. Or any RPGs, because some people are like, well, comedy's not my thing, then what do? And now that it is okay to do this, you can find, you're gonna find 7 other people or 5 other people who are gonna wanna do that. And then you can get together, and it's a safe space, even if you're not in front of a giant audience. I mean, the people around you in that group are kind of your audience. Sometimes you don't even know each other that well. It's a friend of a friend of a friend, and you're like, oh, I don't know most of the people at this table. So that's another direction, just in case you're not coming.
There's a panel on D&D.
Oh man, that's right. Super fun. Our time is up. Thank you so much for spending your time with us this morning.